Stalker is directed by the famous Korean filmmaker Park Chan-wook. Whoever has seen his films like Joint Security Area, Old Boy, and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance know him for his unique creativity, stunning design, and heart-stopping suspense. I'd like to thank the Frio Gallery Award for organizing this film event, as well as AFE Silver Theatre and Angelica Film Center for their participation. But most of all, I'd like to thank you, our guests, for your interest in Korean films and your presence this evening. Last year, the world witnessed an explosion of Korean pop culture like never before. This phenomenon was led by a very talented man in a now famous blue tuxedo. You know him as Psy. And you haven't heard Gangnam Style at least 50 times by now. I wonder where we've been hiding all the time. Psy and many other Korean artists are riding what we call the Korean wave, or Hallyu. It includes music, film, dramas, and other forms of popular culture. If 2012 was the year of K-pop, then 2013 is on track to be the year of K-movies. We have seen more and more Korean films reaching an international audience, especially here in the United States. We have also seen close collaboration between filmmakers with Korean directors taking Hollywood by storm. In addition to this evening's film featuring Nicole Kidman, directed by Park Chan-wook, I'd like to cite two more directors, Kim Ji-hoon and Bong Joon-ho. Kim Ji-hoon directed none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Last Stand. And Bong Joon-ho directed star-studded international cast in his film Snowpiercer. It is an exciting time to be a fan of Korean film and filmmakers. We can never underestimate the power of cultural exchange through film. It is a way to connect with friends from across the globe and a unique window into different cultures. I am confident that this festival will do just that for the Republic of Korea and the United States. Before ending, I would like to wish a great success to Stalker, Nicole Kidman, and Park Chan-wook. Thank you. Enjoy the show.
Tonight is to find questions to ask him that he has not already heard 100 times. So I will start with a question. I recently read an interview with you where you talked about how you like to stretch genre, experiment with genre. So I'd like you to maybe talk to us about how you did that with this film.
한쪽 발만 담고 있다고나 할까요? 저는 뭐 그렇게 일부러 그래야지 하고 뭐 그렇게 작정을 하고 그런 건 아닌데 따지고 보면 어려서부터 장르 영화를 좋아하면서 성장했고 그래서 그 장르의 관습을 아주 몸에 익숙해 있는데 그것만 그냥 따라가자면 너무 영화가 예측 가능한 뻔한 영화가 되기가 쉬워서 거기서 벗어나려고 몸부림치다 보니까 또 좀 약간 다른 장르 관습과는 다른 쪽으로 영화가 이제 빠져버리기도 하죠.
Well, he is not entirely outside of a genre. Definitely he's not playing only within the genre either. So in this sense, you could say that he's in a tricky place where he only has one foot in the genre. it's not a function of where he's consciously thinking, well, I'm not going to conform to the genre. Because, come to think of it, from the very early age, he has grown up watching all these different genre films. And he's very familiar with conventions of these genres. So, by following genre conventions, he also knows that it makes for a very predictable film. And it is a boring thing to be predictable. And that's why he strives to infuse some unpredictability about his work, and perhaps that's why his films are not conforming to those conventions of the genre.
So does anyone in the audience have a question? Yes, let's start right here.
So to follow on with that, in what ways would you say that you have set up Stoker to try to mislead the audience? What ways do you want us to be misled as we watch it and to not be able to predict it?
우선 스토커라는 제목이 소설 그래서 이것이 그 소설가가 쓴 유명한 작품이라는 정도로 회귀 작품이니까 오해가 있을 수 있지만 또 엉크차이라는 이름을 가져올 수 있듯이 히치콕의 어떤 영화에 강력한 영향을 받은 세팅이죠. 그래서 또 히치콕적인 무엇인가 라고 선별을 할 수 있겠죠. 그런 모든 것이 영화에 전혀 없는 것은 아니지만 그것만으로 영화가 이루어진 것은 아니기 때문에 장르적인 의미에서 그것은 일종의 선입견을 형성하고 그리고 또 그것을 어느 정도는 따르고 어느 정도는 배신하면서 영화를 만드는 겁니다.
First of all, the very title of the film, Stoker, is a mislead because it takes after a very well-known writer whose work has created very much a genre unto itself. But the mislead is, well, in that case, is Stoker, a film that follows the traditions of the vampire genre. And from the name Uncle Charlie, you would have guessed that it's Uncle Charlie is also a character in one of the Hitchcock films. So the audience might think, well, it must have been written under a very strong influence of Hitchcock. It sounds like a very Hitchcockian film. So this is another set of preconceived notions about the film. But this film is not entirely about those Hitchcockian reference or vampiric elements or notions. So, from the very beginning, he has established a set of preconceived, what the audience might take as a preconceived ideas in terms of genre, but by not following any of those so-called conventions, he's playing with them.
Okay, let's go over here first. Yep.
One of the things I admire about your work is your use of CGI and computer effects in your storytelling. I think it's fervent, it's also modest. My question is, how do you know when too much is too much in terms of storytelling technique, in terms of digital manipulation, or in terms of technology in general?
보기보다는 많은 그런 기술이 사용되죠. 컴퓨터의 그래스가 그렇게 그려지는 것도 많이 사용됩니다. 예를 들면 이 영화에서는 뭐 거미는 다 그렇게 그려진 것이고 또 머리를 빗기다가 사냥터의 풀숲으로 전환되는 도 역시 그렇게 해서 만들어진 거죠.
Well, when you see his films, there are actually more of these techniques that goes into the filmmaking and the storytelling than what might appear at first glance. He tends to rely quite a lot on CGI-generated visual effects. In this film, for instance, the spider is entirely CGI, and when Evie's hair is brushed and it transitions into the grass field, that transition also relies on CGI.
근데 그것을 결정하는 것은 뭐 대부분의 영화도 그런 것처럼 저 역시도 촬영 전에 그것은 다 정해져 있어야 그런 작업을 하는 것이 가능해지죠. 그래서 더군다나 저는 또 스토리보드를 전체를 만드는 감독이기 때문에 보통의 감독들이 그런 CGI가 필요한 장면만 스토리보드를 만든다면 저는 전체를 만들고 사람입니다. 그렇기 때문에 이 전체 영화 안에서 이 장면이 콘텍스트 안에서 어떻게 들어갈지가 좀 더 분명하다고 할 수 있죠. 그렇기 때문에 이것이 영화 전체에 잘 녹아 들어가 있는지 아닌지를 판단하기가 더 좋다, 더 정확하게 판단할 수 있다고 생각합니다.
In terms of how he determines when too much is too much, well, just like other filmmakers creating films and they're using CGI, VFX, things need to be predetermined in order for them to be possible. Speaking about himself, he is a filmmaker who creates a storyboard for the entire film, from the very first shot that you see to the very last shot, in the order of the edit that he would imagine already in his head before ever going into pre-production or production. So, whereas some other filmmakers might just create storyboards specifically for those effects-heavy scenes in order to try and plan for a complicated shoot, he actually creates storyboards for the entire film, the whole thing. So he supposes what it enables them to do is to see which particular scene works to what sort of effect within the context of the entire film. So he can see the bigger picture even when he is designing a specific shot, which might rely on technology such as CGI, VFX. So he's able to see how that shot, matches well against all the other shots or within the context of the entire story, and to be pretty accurate about the effects that it will have, whether it's too much or not.
I think it's the one-way thing, yeah.
Thanks. All right, so very quickly, I want to ask about the sound and the music that normally, as an average filmgoer, I don't pay very much attention. But in this case, where really, even the shower head sounded creepy. Even back to TV and banal things, there were no screen, no anything, but very, very, very well played. So, and also music like the forehand composition, pretty good. And the second very quick thing is, it takes up until the unfortunate bottle to understand that's contemporary. And I was wondering what that meant. It could be any decade from the 50s to now. You heard what years it's all about.
address your first question. First question first, and we'll go to the second part afterwards.
사실 저는 모든 영화에서 항상 그 소리에 아주 민감한 영화를 만들려고 노력해왔고 정말 그 한국말로 소리에 놓친 거라고 한 만큼 공들여서 소리를 만들어 왔어요. 이 영화가 유독 그런 지점을 많이 듣는 이유는 제 생각에는 이 영화의 주변 발견되는 장소가 외딴집이고 거기에 사람이 많이 살지도 않고 밖에 나가봐야 또 조용한 밤에 뭐 놀이터나 뭐 그런 데이기 때문에 그런 소리를 여러분께서 민감하게 들을 수 있는 그런 환경이 제공됩니다. 전체적으로 조용한 가운데 어떤 특정한 소리들이 두드러질 때 귀에 들릴 수 있는 거죠. 저도 이 각본을 읽을 때 이걸 해야 되겠다, 이 작품이 좋다라고 이렇게 생각한 이유 중에 중요한 게 바로 그거였습니다. 조용하다는 거. 조용한데 뭔가 신경을 거슬리게 하는, 뭔가 자극하는, 관객을 예민하게 만드는, 조용하게, 영화가 조용하게. 자꾸 무슨 일이 벌어질까 뭔가 긴장하게 되죠. 이게 조용한데 조용하면서도 지루하지 않고 계속 긴장하게 만드는 거. 그것이 그 각본에 그런 점이 마음에 들고, 그 긴장을 유지하게 만드는 제일 좋은 수단은 소리라고 생각합니다.
In all of his films, he does his best. He spends every effort to create films where the audience can be very sensitive to the sound. So much so that it's his mantra to say that my life depends on sound. Every sound, every sound that for his films, he tries to design quite meticulously, very deliberately, and possibly the reason why the sound has jumped out to you, particularly in this film, is because the location where most of the story takes place, the main location, is a very isolated place. It's a quiet place, and even when you find yourself outside of that house in this film, it's a very quiet, dark woods or a quiet playground. So already the environment is where you can pick up these sounds in a very sensitive way. So the location, in the first place, the environment provides for that. Provides for particular sounds standing out to the audience in the way that you describe these. Even in these banal things, you can hear creepy sounds, and that's exactly the kind of thing that drew him to the script in the first place when he was reading it. The fact that it's a quiet script. And in this quiet environment, every sound he could imagine would stand out like that. And because of that, it creates tension, despite the fact that it is a very quiet story, very quiet film, where you wonder at every turn what is going to happen next. And when you say a quiet film, you might automatically think a dull film, but what's great about this script he found was that whilst being quiet, you could always feel the palpable tension on the pages, and that is why he liked it, and that's something that he always kept in his mind making this film.
제일 좋은 예를 하나만 드리면요. 엉클 찰리가 첫 번째 디너를 하기 위해서 와인을 이렇게 이 와인이 1994년 산. 그러니까 그 전에 대사를 통해서 이비는 그 와인이 자기를 상징한다고 생각합니다. 성숙한 향, 어린 와인들은 그 상대할 수 없는 이런 성숙한 오래된 와인의 아름다운 그 장점을 얘기하죠. 그래서 이것은 자기를 위해서 산 와인이다라고 생각합니다. 그렇지만 식사가 끝나고 둘만 남았을 때 엉클찰리는 이건 94년 산이고 너와 나이가 같다라고 인디아에게 얘기하면서 이것은 인디아를 위해서 사왔다는 것을 알려주죠. 그때 그 와인잔을 내밀 때 테이블을 긁고 지나가는 유리의 소리, 그것을 이렇게 잡아두는 인디아 그 소리가 딱 끝나면서 그리고 그 향을 음미할 때 그 인디아의 코에서 나오는 숨이 그 잔에서 맴돌 회오리 칠 때 이 소리들이 굉장히 중요해요. 이것은 드디어 인디아가 엉클찰리라는 악을 맞아들이고 그의 거부할 수 없는 치명적인 유혹을 받아들이는 순간입니다. 그것이 사운드로 표현되는 것입니다. 그 사운드를 위해서 그 부분을 제가 새로 썼다고 해도 과언이 아니에요. 그 사운드를 상상하면서 그 부분을 쓴 거예요. 그러니까 얼마나 이게 중요한지 아실 수 있겠죠.
The best example probably in the way, in terms of how important you think sound is probably during that first dinner scene, and after Evie has left the table, Uncle Charlie says this wine is from 1994, the year you were born, and he offers the glass to India. And through the dialogue that came before this dinner scene, during the kitchen you might remember, Uncle Charlie describes the wine to be mature in aroma. Can compare that to a younger wine, which is too tannic, not ready to be opened. And this is something that makes Evie think, oh, this wine is for me. Whereas it's revealed at the end of that dinner, by Uncle Charlie saying, well, it's 1994, it's the year you were born, so this wine in fact is for India. Then he pushes the glass to India across the table. We hear the sound of the wine glass scraping on the surface of this wooden table. And India grabs the wine glass and she breathes into it, and her breath gets trapped and swirls around inside the glass, and it is described sonically. And this was a very important moment for him, because it's the moment when India has accepted the seduction of evil, and she does not say no to it. It's a deadly seduction here. And he wanted to express that through sound. And he wanted to do this so much so that he went back to the script and he revised the scene specifically so that Uncle Charlie can say this and offer the wine in such a way to India. So it is a very good example to illustrate how much importance he places on sound. And the second part of your question was to do with... Are you sure?
Maybe we should give this other side of the room a chance. There's a waving arm in the back there. Yes, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much. My question is, your films are extremely emotionally intense, but also very complicated, with the plot structure and everything. So, my question is, how do you keep that in mind while you're working on a script and directing, so that it doesn't become convoluted, and so that it doesn't become too fictitious to be out of a realm that you're
저는 그 각본을 만들 때 무슨 이렇게 도표를 만든다거나 포스트잇을 거기에 붙여가면서 사건들을 순서대로 정리하고 그렇게 해본 적은 없어요. 그냥 씁니다. 그냥 쓰기 시작하죠. 어떤 경우는 이렇게 전체 그 줄거리를 미리 마련해 놓고 쓸 때도 있고, 또 어떤 때는 그런 것조차 없어요. 다시 말해서 어떻게 끝날지도 모른 채로 시작을 해서 무작정 선언해 가는 경우도 있어요.
Well, when he is writing a script, he doesn't use any diagrams or use post-it scene summaries to place scenes in order. He hasn't ever resorted to those tools. He simply sits down at his desk and writes. He starts from scene 1 and just goes from there. Sometimes he would have the entire story in his head already, or sometimes he would just simply begin writing without knowing where the story would end.
아마 복숭나의 것이나 친절한 그대시, 박쥐 이런 영화들은 그냥 끝을 모른 채로 막 써내려갔던 작품이에요.
Probably it was films like Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Lady Vengeance, and Thirst were the examples where he started writing without knowing how the stories would end.
사이보그 중에 잘 읽고
Probably I'm a cyborg, but that's okay too.
올보이나 스토커는 끝을 알고 그러니까 예 맞습니다.
With Old Boy and Stoker, he knew how the story was going to end.
그게 뭐가 더 좋다라고 말할 수는 없고, 다만 제가 하고 싶은 거는 이런 얘기예요. 그러니까 저는 혼자 쓰진 않아요. 거의 대부분의 시간을 누군가와 반드시 함께 씁니다. 물론 이제 혼자 마지막 순간에, 마지막 일주일에 일주일은 내가 정말 마지막 손질은 해요. 그렇지만 그 대부분의 기간은 항상 공동 작가가 있거나 적어도 한국식 연출자가 있어요. 그래서 계속 의견을 묻습니다. 야, 이거 말이 된다고 생각해? 이것과 이것 중에 뭐가 좋아? 라든가 지적하신 것처럼 이건 좀 너무 복잡하지 않아? 라든가 여러 가지, 그러니까 관객의 입장에서 나에게 조언을 해줄 사람이 항상 곁에 그런 사람을 봅니다.
But it's not really a matter of which is better, whether knowing the end or just starting out without knowing how where it will take you. What he really wants to say is that he never writes alone. And most of the times he would always have someone next to him while he is writing, or writing together. There will be a collaborating person there. In the last week or last couple of weeks, he would spend, of course, time by himself to do final polish of the script. But most of the time during the script writing stage, he would work with either a collaborating writer, or if not, there will always be one of more of the AD department people in Korea. On a film production, ADs start very early, right from the script writing stage. So he would always ask his collaborating writer or those AD assistant directors who are always around. Do you think this makes sense, or which do you like better? So he's able to avoid he supposes what you refer to as being convoluted or being too fictitious.
여기서 중요한 거는 그 함께 있는 사람이 누구냐인 것이겠죠. 그 사람은 저보다는 좀 정상적인 사람이어야겠죠.
But in this case, it's always important who is there with you then when you're writing. For him, he hopes that it's somebody more normal than he is.
Well, before we go, I have a question that is also a shameless attempt to get people to come tomorrow to see your film. I noticed, I don't know if this is conscious, but a parallel between this film and JSA, Joint Security Area, in that in both films there's an image that you see towards the beginning that is then shown at the end that you have to reread and rethink about having seen the story go by. In this case, I'm particularly thinking about the flower, which she says at the beginning it can't help what color it is, and then in the end we realize it's red because the blood has been spilled on it. And in JSA, of course, it's a photograph, which takes on a different meaning after what happens, and you have to come tomorrow to see what happens in JSA. So I'm wondering if this was a conscious parallel between these.
That just now. Right.
확실한 거는 제가 뭔가의 오도가 있고 그것이 뒤에 가서 이렇게 진상이 밝혀지는 거잖아요. 말하자면 어떤 선입견이 바로 잡힙니다. 무심코 보았던 또 무심코 생각했던 어떤 것이 그것은 진실과 다르다. 그 뒤에 가보면 뭔가 새로운, 뭔가 전혀 다른, 때로는 무시무시한 어떤 것이 거기 도사리고 있다. 때로는 JSA처럼 어떤 비극적 그런 식의 드러내는 순간을 제가 굉장히 각별하게 중시하고 있는 사실입니다.
What is for sure is that he likes this idea of mislead. And he likes how, as you follow the story, and when you get to the end, there's this reveal of what the truth of the matter is. It's a moment where the preconceived notions or prejudices get corrected. This is a moment where things that you have just not given much thought to, you realize quite far from the truth. When you get to the end, you get a reveal of the reality of the things, which is completely different from how you perceive it at the beginning, to a very terrifying effect, or in the case of JSA, very tragic effect. So he likes these moments of reveal, and it is true that he always tries to work in this way.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much.